How's everybody doing today? Ah, great to be here. What was that music playing and just pumping us up right beforehand? What was that song? Anybody knows? Yes! That's great. Hey, I want to make sure that I can move around and don't have to stand at the podium. Is that okay for the cameras and everything? Cool. Thanks Meg for that introduction and Brett for the introduction. You know, this is our third day on a book tour, and we're really glad to be here for it. And part of the reason why we're glad to be here in the Silicon Valley is because we'd really love you all to actually kind of pay attention to the presentation, but also don't hesitate to use your phones and your iPads and all your other devices, and feel free to tweet and get the word out on. I should have thrown up the LinkedIn my LinkedIn page too, but what were we thinking? What a way to start. But one of the things that is really important for no-name authors in the first week is just to kind of get the word out. And so there was a lot of emphasis that the publisher placed on media, kind of traditional media, and we went down that route. And I now live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and so we went to a local news station, and this anchor read the book and did a really nice piece for about 4 minutes. And the only problem was that he introduced the piece by saying, "Here's my guest today. His name's Rye Barcott, and he's written a book about himself." And I was like, come on, man. I mean, it's a memoir. It's far more personal than I would have ever imagined it to be. But the real purpose of it, and the reason I wrote it, was hopefully to reach folks that are thinking about the difference that they can make in the communities that they serve. And the core of the book is looking at these two forms of service that to some seem contradictory, but actually have a lot of similarities. Military service and social entrepreneurship in this community called Kibera. And this is a small glimpse of Kibera. It's only a glimpse of it because it's a pretty vast place. About 200,000 to 500,000 people live there. Nobody really knows the population estimates. And in many ways, it's a microcosm of a lot of the world's problems. A lot of problems that we're facing, from health discrepancies to ethnic violence, and just sheer abject poverty. You know, by some estimates, up to a sixth of the world's population is going to live in conditions like Kibera, informal urban settlements, by 2020. A sixth. So it's really a defining problem that we all face as a global community. And I went there initially kind of out of self-interested reasons. My first mentors in life were my father and his friends, and they were military. They were in the military. They were Marines. And I wanted to make a difference like we all do. As a young kid, I was 13 years old, and I thought the Marine Corps was the answer. But Kibera happened on the path to going in the Marines. And the reason it happened was because I was interested in better understanding why ethnic violence happened. You know, this was before September 11th, back in 1999, 2000. And I assumed that as a Marine, I would have to lead men and women into places on peacekeeping missions and interventions of ethnic violence. You know, the Bosnias, the Rwandas of the world. And so that was really what led me to Kibera, because it had a history of ethnic violence. I wanted to better understand why that happened. You know, I was 20 years old. I'd taken some Swahili classes at UNC. I'd done that in part because my mom's an anthropologist, and she really taught me the value of, if you're going to try and understand a community, you gotta do it from within. You gotta actually talk to people, and that, you know, even if you learn just a sliver of the local language, at least that's a start. And so I learned that language. I've learned a little bit of Swahili, and I applied for a fellowship at our university. It was a pretty remarkable fellowship. It was designed just to have a life-enhancing experience. That's it, $5,000 for a summer to have a life-enhancing experience. And they gave about 5 of them away. And so I applied for it and was fortunate enough to get it. And one of the reasons I applied for it was because of a fellow that I had met who had gotten one a couple years earlier. His name was Ted Lord. And Ted Lord was an aspiring medical, he wanted to be a medical doctor. He was an undergraduate at the time. But he had gotten one of these fellowships and gone to Zanzibar, this small island off the coast of Tanzania, and learned how to carve doors from master door carvers in Zanzibar. And then carved a set of doors and brought them back to the university. Ted came to our class and told us about this, and I kind of sat there and thought, wow, how did you do that? And I actually asked him it. I was impressed. He was 20 years old. He was a doer. He was a doer. He got it done. And I asked him about how he went about that. And he said, you know, you kind of find some things that you want to do in life, and then you put yourself out there. You reach out to a bunch of people, and eventually, maybe a few, maybe 5% will give a damn. Maybe 5% will give a damn, and you start there. And so with that advice, I started blasting out emails to folks in Kibera and around Kibera. And I eventually connected with a couple people my age who said, yeah, sure, you can come here, and if you really want to spend your time in our shack inside Kibera, you're more than welcome. And one of those fellows was a guy named Dan Ogola. And so what I thought I'd do today is give you just a brief excerpt from the book of when I was coming into Kibera 10 years ago as a 20-year-old, and Dan had welcomed me into part of his life. And I really came there with I came there with an ignorant attitude, a natural attitude. All I saw was this in the initial days. All I saw was the deprivation. All I saw was the kids playing in open sewage and conditions that were really, really completely overwhelming. And so this is an excerpt of the first meeting with Dan and his neighbor Baba Chris. And this is Baba Chris's daughter on the slide. And it's inside their compound, and each shack is about 10 by 10 feet. They call them 10 by 10s. And the best way, I think, to begin to understand what life's like in conditions like this is to imagine growing up in an area about the size of your average bedroom, American bedroom, with your entire family. And the noise is always constant. And the noise is always constant in part because you're separated from your neighbors by a thin piece of tin that's no thicker than your thumbnail. And for me personally, that was actually one of the most difficult parts, because I appreciate sleeping in silence, and I appreciate just a little bit of silence each day to kind of process things and make sense of what's going on. So this is a brief excerpt of that first 2 days in Kibera, and Dan welcoming me into his place, his home. By the time I arrived at Dan's shack, he had finished cooking the maize meal ugali and sukuma wiki, collard greens. Baba Chris joined us for dinner. He was sick and wanted to make some small talk to take his mind from the pain. We spoke about English Premier League soccer, then we turned to politics, which Baba Chris seemed to follow as if it were a sport. Eventually, Baba Chris brought the conversation to his illness. Sweating and shivering, he had lost his appetite and was in too much pain to ignore it. A friend of his who was a nurse thought he had malaria. The cost of medication was about $7, which was more than he could afford. A week earlier, he had spent his meager savings on school fees for his children. Without other options, Baba Chris intended to wait it out. If his wife made enough money selling some small things in the local markets, they might be able to pay for medication in a few days. I didn't ask what was on my mind. Was Baba Chris going to die? Later that night, as Dan slept soundly, I tried to process the blizzard that had been my first 2.5 days in and around Kibera. I knew so little about the place, and it was so vast, yet I was meeting good people. Jane with her unforgettable smile and infectious laugh, Dan, and Baba Chris. The only reason Baba Chris brought up the cost of malaria medication was because I had asked him. He never asked me for assistance, and I wasn't sure how I would have responded if he had asked for help. I told myself as a rule that I wouldn't give out money in Kibera. It was a safety mechanism that my father had suggested. The color of my skin made people suspect that I had a lot of money, and I couldn't afford to confirm those suspicions if I intended to spend my nights there. Yet I wanted to help Baba Chris. I admired his strength, and I felt that I knew him even though we had just met. I could give him some of my mefloquine pills. However, to the best of my knowledge, the pills were designed to prevent malaria, not treat it. Perhaps I could give Baba Chris some money through Dan. People shouted in the distance. The noises never stopped in Kibera. Images of small coffins swirled in my head. I had come to study youth and ethnic violence. Now I was thinking about what it must be like to be Baba Chris, to have a family and be stuck in this place. My mind was so far away from research. Ethnic violence seemed like remote problems relative to day-to-day survival. You know, Kibera was unbelievable. It was as if I was imagining it, even though I was there in a tin shack with my back against a lumpy mattress. It wasn't simply the side effects of mefloquine that left me questioning reality. It was everything about the place. Its magnitude, its deprivation, its raw pain. Kibera was wrong. In our world of plenty, people shouldn't live like this. How was it possible that a father might die of a disease that could be treated for $7? I paid more for my haircuts. So that's an excerpt of when I'm initially going in. I'm 20 years old, and one of the things I've tried to do with this book is really take folks into the experiences as I lived them over this course of 10 years. And part of the reason I did that was because I had one group in particular that I was writing the book for. I hope that it appeals to a broad audience, but one group in particular, and that was college students. College students at that really amazing point in their moment in their lives when they're in a transition period and they're thinking about the difference that they want to make in the world. And I came into Kibera, I really had the wrong attitude. Because in those initial days, I pitied Baba Chris. I pitied Dan. All I saw was the squalor in the community. But it wasn't long, and it wasn't many conversations later, that I realized a fundamental truth. And that fundamental truth is the dedication of the book, and in many ways the ethos of our organization that we went on to found. And I think it'll really resonate here at LinkedIn, because it's talent is universal, but opportunity is not. Talent's universal, but opportunity is not. And when I was with Reed last night, he said that one of the mottos here is when talent meets opportunity. Yet there's so few opportunities in some places. And it doesn't take a whole heck of a lot. That's what I assumed, at least. I was also realizing something else that was pretty important, and that was that as different as I was from Dan and Baba Chris, we were actually more similar than we were different. And so I think with the book in particular, the best two examples that really embody that theme are my two co-founders, Salim Mohammed and Tabitha Festo. And they're to whom the book is dedicated. And their stories, I think, can give insight to you all as you start thinking about the impact that you can make in the communities that you're connected to. And this is a photograph of Tabitha. She was about 32 when I first met her. She was a widow with 3 kids, and she was a nurse living in a 10x10 in Kibera. And her story was not particularly unique in Kibera, but one day she confronted me right before I left. I was only there for 5 weeks, and I was about to leave to go to officer candidate school, our boot camp for Marines, for the rest of the summer. I was only there for 5 weeks, and she confronted me right before I left, and she said, you know, you're asking all these kids about their problems, lakini mimi nakuwa na shida kubwa pia. I got big problems too, and you've never bothered to ask me about my problems. So sit down, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life. I said, okay, Mama, and I sat down. And she took me through her life. And towards the end of it, she proposed a solution. She said, give me 2,000 shillings, about $26. And I had made a habit of not giving out any money in Kibera, so I asked her, you know, Tabitha, why? What are you going to do with it? And she said, well, you know, I'm going to buy vegetables. I'm going to start a vegetable selling business. And you know, the one thing that you notice in almost any slum community like Kibera is that vegetable stands are ubiquitous. And so I mentioned that to Tabitha, and she said, no, 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 you don't understand. I'm going to buy my vegetables here in Kibera. I'm going to sell them across town in Eastleigh where I can undercut the competition. So believe in me. And there was something about the conviction in her voice, and she had a plan, and what the hell, it was only $26, and I was leaving the next day, and so I handed her the money. I didn't think I'd see her again. I reported to the basics, to officer candidate school the following day. And in order to process those two experiences, I kind of try to build mental compartments between the two worlds. I didn't talk about Kibera with Marines and vice versa. And I got through that 6-week period, came back to the university to start writing an honors thesis. And I couldn't get the words out of my head from this guy, Salim Mohammed. Forgive his attire. It's just atrocious. Really appalling. At least they didn't get very far in the tournament this year. Do we have any Dukies in the room? Oh no, Meg's a Dookie! Well, this is especially there for you, Meg. Salim confronted me. I had gone to another slum community because I kept on hearing about this organization called the Mathare Youth Sports Association. And Salim was a leader of it. And what was so impressive about this organization was that it was using soccer using soccer to create role models within the community. But it was led by residents in Mathare. It wasn't led by outsiders. It was led by Salim and his team. And so I went over there, started talking to Salim, interviewed him for too long, and towards the end of the interview he said, you know, mister, what are you doing here? You know, I mean, you're going to leave, you're going to have research, but what's the community going to see in return? And so while I was back in my senior year, I kept on hearing that about research. And it was bothering me because I was getting research out of it. And something else was in my mind, too. It was a line that the Marines often emphasize, and that is a bias for action. Have a bias for action. And I was still hanging out with Ted Lord and some of the other young doers who were my age and done impressive things as a 20-year-old, you know. Whether it's Doors in Zanzibar or our future board chair who was a year older than me, had gotten another small grant, went to South Africa, produced a documentary. The documentary was shown in the International AIDS Festival. She was a doer. And so with them in mind, I emailed Salim one day and I said, Salim, why don't we try and take your model at Mathare and apply it to Kibera? And fundamentally, it wouldn't be me leading it, but it'd be you and the team that we can galvanize on the ground. And he wrote back and he was like, sure, man, whatever. We'll see if you ever get here. And of course, he was thinking, this guy's never going to come back. But for me, that was his email was actually really assuring. And so I decided, what the heck? We live in such an abundant world. How difficult can it be to raise $20,000 and start an organization? We called it Carolina for Kibera. It was a non-governmental organization, got 501c3 status, and then started writing letters for funding. And we wrote 600 letters in my dorm room one night. And we wrote them to anybody we could think of. We wrote them to Michael Jordan, our most famous alum. We wrote them to Bill Gates, of course. We got everybody we could find on the board of trustees. And can you guess how many people replied? 5%, an aggressive prediction. 2 people replied and they didn't send checks. And I was like, God, I mean, but that was just the beginning. It was just the beginning because, of course, in order to achieve anything, you got to go through some roadblocks. And that fundraising was very uncomfortable for me to do. It's just an odd thing, you know, it really is. Have you all been involved has anybody been involved in fundraising? Well, it's one thing to write a letter. It's another thing to walk up to somebody and say, sir, what's your name? What's your name, sir? Anoop. Anoop? Anoop. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Rye. I got this cause. We're going to invest in local leaders in this particular community. We need $20,000. Anoop, we believe in us. Will you give us $5,000? Oh, yeah. He feels uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable. But it really, it's funny because it ended up taking that direct ask for us to finally get over the mark. A month before we left, we went back to Kibera. We started a sports program. The demand was abundant. This is a soccer ball from Kibera. It's simple. It's actually just plastic bags wrapped in twine. And this is a grainy photograph, but it's a cool photograph because it's our first ever soccer tournament. And we had no idea how many people were going to show up, and thousands came out. It's a one soccer field in the heart of the community. And so that was what became the beginning of the organization. And I had almost forgotten about Tabitha because I had only met her twice, and you know, $26, what's that in the scheme of things? But she had taken that money and started selling vegetables. She was selling sukuma wiki, the lettuce on the left there, and then tomatoes in the middle. And she found me after a couple days. And she grabbed my hand and took me zigzagging through these alleys to her 10 by 10 foot shack. And this is a photograph of her shack. It's kind of the one on the far right there. And the woman in the middle is Jane, her best friend, who had introduced me to her. And the fellow on the left is a buddy of mine who volunteered with our organization later and is now a captain in the Marines. And on that wall, you can kind of see the faint remains of it was written Rye Medical Clinic. Rye Medical Clinic. And I sat there kind of dumbfounded and feeling a little bit self-conscious too, because what had I done at the end of that? I'd given $26 to somebody who was remarkable, who deserved a shot, and who in fact had the solutions to the problems that she faced and her community faced. Well, Tabitha became a co-founder of Carolina for Kibera. The clinic formed in with the sports program, which made a lot of sense to us because we wanted to take an integrative approach. You know, leadership development has to, you got to look at healthcare, you got to look at education. All these things are related because after all, we live integrated lives. And this is what became the Tabitha Clinic last year. It treats over 40,000 patients a year. It's in the heart of the community. And it has 2 medical doctors. And it all started with 26 bucks. And so in some ways, that's kind of the core of the story and our ethos as an organization. And what the book does then is it kind of bounces back and forth with these experiences that I had as a Marine. And this is one of the photos while on patrol in Fallujah, Iraq. And you know, Kibera for me during this period was actually really a respite. I was able to call Salim and our team on the ground, and that was a source of comfort for me. And the reason why it worked was because I wasn't calling the shots as an organization. It was led on the ground. I was still a volunteer in the U.S. I still am to this day. We have one employee, Leanne Bankowski. It's actually her birthday today, and she's with us. And over 60 employees in Kenya. And I tried to keep those mental compartments between the two worlds, but what I found was that they clashed and converged. And sometimes at those moments where they came together were the moments of greatest insight for me. One of those incidents happened at Abu Ghraib, that infamous prison, where 2 years before I had arrived, Americans had done really unthinkable things. And I was there to find 2 assassins, 2 folks who had actually admitted to assassinating the chairman of the Fallujah City Council, a fellow named Sheikh Kamal al-Nazal. And those assassins were 11 and 15 years old. 11 and 15 years old. And I was there to find them and follow up with an interview. And you know, I had become so numb to those circumstances that I had begun seeing them as part of this larger enemy apparatus. And I found them at Abu Ghraib on a field. And they were kicking a soccer ball. And they were just being kids. And I had at that moment had to think, surely there's got to be a better way than this. You know? What are we seeing around the world right now? We've got revolutions from Middle East to throughout Africa. In Kibera alone, half the population is under the age of 15. Half. They're youth. This revolution is being driven by youth. Is that the situation of a time bomb? Or is it the path to a more modern, more peaceful, equitable future? And we hope that it's the latter. And we think that it can be the latter, and that we as individuals can play a role in that, and that our country can as well. And we can do so by learning from this approach that we've taken in Kibera. It's a long view. It's a long-term investment. It's a participatory approach. It's not coming in with the answers to problems. It's working together with them. And it's a fundamental shift in some of the ways that we've approached this in the past, I think. So in any ways, it's a light read. I hope you really enjoy it. One of the things that I'm very excited about is that we are using it to try and reach high school students and colleges in particular. And so we're on a 26-city tour and outreach campaign for the next 3 months. And in addition to the book, we've got an interactive platform where folks can sign up and take a 26-day challenge. And I hope some of you all will be interested in taking the 26-day challenge, where each day you adjust your lifestyle in some small but significant way to resemble life in Kibera. And by the way, those aren't just deprivations. Those are also actions such as bringing over your neighbors and sharing a meal. They're communal actions as well. And we think that that's a real way that we can take this model, this approach, and have others learn from it. Some of that's happened in the past. This is a photograph from Time for Kids that came out and covered our organization. One of the things about the sports program is that in order to play on the teams have to be interethnic. And so you have different ethnic groups that are coming together. And in order to play soccer, you also have to participate in community service. You know, my co-founder, Salim, likes to say, yeah, nothing in life is free. Everything has to be earned. And that's especially true, and you know it to be true if you live in a community like Kibera. So that is our hope, and that's my hope. And I think really this is the long-term vision of success, is role models within the community. These are two of our girls on a girls soccer team, and they're now high school graduates, and they're living productive lives, and they're role models within their community, and that's a really powerful thing if we all think about the place that role models have had in our own lives. And so what I hope this book will help you to, I hope you can engage with it, but I also hope that it'll help you think about the difference that you can make in your communities. And the last thing that we're tying it into is a documentary that is in final stage production, and we just finished the trailer, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share it with you today. I like this documentary a lot in particular because the book is far more personal than I would have ever imagined it to be. The documentary focuses on the local heroes within Kibera, and you'll get a glimpse of a couple of them here as we roll it.
My life without soccer, I think it will not be good. Most of the time that I have, I think about football.
Playing soccer turns out to be one of my best thing I've ever liked in my life. When you're playing football, this confidence that comes from deep inside you, that makes you wanna play it all your entire life.
If we keep not paying the house rent, we may be chased away.
Because this is a slum, they don't care who you are. If they want to do something to you, they can really do anything.
It haunts you as a coach to see a player hungry.
A bad company corrupts good character. There was no humanity.
So many died that day. I don't like remembering about the violence. Friends died.
Your head could be chopped, and we had so many people die.
Yeah, there's been a rivalry between Shofco and Mofire.
There's one trophy that we are lacking, that is Carolina for Kibera. But I believe on Sunday, there will be a trophy here.
The cup will remain being ours, so we can't stand losing.
What I can say on Saturday, we shall win. We shall win.
All right, the trailer to the documentary, and that will be out in the fall. It's awesome to be here at LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. I think it was really cool that Meg linked mapped the LinkedIn connections, and we're using it actually. We're using it as we go around on this 26-city tour because when we have public events, I've been going on and we've all been figuring out who our first and second degree connections are to get invitations out. That's a simple way that we've been using it. And we're looking for some other ways too. If you'd be willing, please do read the book. Would love for you to do that. And also, the first week is pretty important for no-name authors to get the word out and have some sales. So if we're a secular organization, but if you'd be willing to evangelize a little bit, that would be great. And then the other thing is the books, thanks to the courtesy of the company, are free. But feel free to contribute to Carolina for Kibera. And we have a $26 fund in particular. And that $26 fund is a small but simple way to fund the future Tabithas in this particular community. And hopefully folks will learn from those models and be able to find your own Tabithas. And so what I thought that I'd do is, this is a conga. And when Tabitha first met me, and they're kind of used for all sorts of different things, so for clothes to wrap babies in, Some folks use them as wall dividers in Kibera. And this is a pretty special one because it's actually similar to the conga that I gave to Tabitha that first time that we had met. I had about 10 of them in my bag. I was going to take them back home, and so I just kind of figured, you know, here's $26 in a conga. And she looked at me, and she was really stunned by it. It was purple like this, but what spoke to her was the saying. There's always a small Swahili aphorism, and that particular conga, the aphorism was "Mawingu ya dunia ufanwike wajane," which means the clouds of heaven cover the widows. And for her, that really was speaking to her because she was a widow, and what it was saying was that God would always be there in her life, and that was something that was that brought great meaning for her. And so I have this today. We found it right before starting the tour, and I thought that we could just do a little raffle, and one person will get it. And now the way that we'd like to do this is to collect business cards, and then we'll pick one of the cards. But do most folks have business cards? No. Okay, that's what I thought, because I asked somebody ahead of time and they said no. So I think the way that we will do this, if it works for you all, is please send a LinkedIn request to me, and we'll take all those LinkedIn requests, and then we'll do a little raffle, and we will send a conga, the one that Tabitha had. So thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and I think I'd love to just kind of open it up and have answer some questions, or also just have a broader dialogue about anything really.
So I'd be curious what you learned about the causes of ethnic violence. I mean, that goes on here in the United States, right? Maybe not to the level of violence there, but it happens here. So tell us what you learned.
Yeah, I was just sitting next to. Sir, remind me of your name. Ashley. I was just sitting next to Ashley as he was watching the trailer, and he leaned over. He said, "You know, poverty is violence, isn't it? Poverty is violence." And so much of our effort is focused on breaking those cycles of poverty and breaking those cycles of violence. It's a really complicated question in many ways, but I think that it comes down to that one thing in particular is important, and that is the absence of land tenure in Kibera. Nobody owns structures in Kibera. It's all under the office of the president, but everybody pays rent. And most of the owners of those structures are absentee owners who are connected to the upper 2 to 3% of the economic and political elite of Kenya. And those are really important. You know, that's people's lifeblood is where they live. And so oftentimes what will happen before election periods in particular, politicians come in and stoke these ethnic differences for their own benefit. And a lot of it ties to the fact that there isn't land tenure in Kibera, but it is now pretty valuable real estate because it's located particularly near the city center. So in that particular instance of Kibera, that's a large contributor to it. Sir?
Yeah, you had mentioned the phrase bias towards action, and just wondering, what other lessons did you take from the Marines and you're able to apply to Kibera, and then vice versa? Yeah,
great question. It's really the heart and soul of a lot of the book. And there are a fair number of them, but let me just point out one other one, and that is values. You know, Tabitha, Salim, and I, we shared one core value in particular that I believe is really important for starting anything in the world or just kind of how you live your life. Can anybody guess what that value is? I'll just throw some things out. Respect. Passion. Good. Good. Those are good. The one that I'm thinking about though is integrity. Integrity, and integrity for me, what that really means is not being a fake, whereas Salinger would say a phony. Recognizing who you are, who your organization is, and staying true to it. And Salim has that, and Tabitha had that, and I think that for me, the Marine Corps also helped reinforce that. The military helped really reinforce that. So thanks for that question. Sure.
Hi, so I'm Brent. Pretty impressed with what you achieved in Kibera. Kind of interested in hearing, what do you see as the key challenges to replicating what you achieved in Kibera in other places in the world?
Yeah, I think, so when you look at our model in particular, I think that the fundamental attribute of what we call participatory development is that the change has to be driven from within the communities. And too often than not, we fall into this Western mindset of thinking, okay, well, we've got the education and the know-how, so surely we can come in and be able to solve these problems largely by ourselves instead of together and within, and really recognizing that truism that talent's universal, but opportunity's not. And frankly, that takes a long-term approach often, right? Because it's about relationships. You know, as we have more of these tools like LinkedIn to widen our social networks, we still have to find that balance between breadth and depth. And at the heart and soul of it, it really is about deep relationships that are rooted in trust and integrity. And that takes time, and that's one of the great limitations of the military, to go in anywhere. Because the military, we're there for 6 months to 12 months, and then you're gone, and another group comes in, and by the time you know who's who in the community, the next rotation happens. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Again, thank you. Very inspiring talk this morning. And I have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
The first is, I'd just be really fascinated to hear what's next for you. As far as, say, Carolina for Kibera, what are the plans for the upcoming years? How else do you want to help further participatory development in Kibera or perhaps other communities? That's question 1.
Yes.
And then the second question is, you're here today at LinkedIn. Just wanted to ask you, have you any thoughts about how can an organization like LinkedIn, a network, a global talent network like LinkedIn that's very committed to, passionate about connecting talent with opportunity, how can Kibera be helped with participating in some way with LinkedIn or other similar organizations?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Right now we're at the 10th anniversary of the organization, and we're kind of at a moment where we've both reflected on the past, but we're really focusing on the future and using what we've done and the lessons learned to help inspire and inform others. That's one thing in the United States. In Kibera, we're still rooted in our core model, and our fundamental mission is leadership development over a long period of time, and sparking that change from within the community. So we've got about 5,000 members who are part of our sports program, and then the clinic, and then we have a girls center and a waste management program, and we invest in new ideas that happen from within the community, and we build partnerships with organizations that range from the CDC to Stanford Design School to UNC's medical school. And so we're always looking for ways to kind of advance that fundamental approach of invested in future Tabithas. With LinkedIn in particular, one of the things that we're trying to think about is as we have this opportunity, particularly over the next 5 to 6 months, with 2 pieces of content, a book and a documentary. How do we use those? How do we leverage the social media tools so that we can translate awareness into action? I think about a book like The Kite Runner, for example, great book, phenomenal book. It's probably touched a lot of people's lives. But what actions have people done from that? And that's part of the reason why I'm really excited about this 26-day challenge in particular, because it gives people a way to do something. And what we'd like to see actually happen is to be able to develop relationships, to connect communities like Kibera with particularly students in the United States. And I think that there are tools that you all are experts at that could be helpful there. So if you have any ideas, please let us know, and would love to hear them, especially over the next 3 months as we're pulling this all together.
So I'm incredibly inspired by social entrepreneurs like yourselves, and I do believe that you guys are creating real change in places all around the world. But one thought I constantly have is whether and if what we really need is more policy-oriented, systematic change, and knowing just where you sit, having spent a good portion of your time in the military. Would love your thoughts on, or if you're spending a lot of your time and effort and mind and trying to shift some of the major policies that our government follows, both for aid and military action.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. So there are two parts to it. There's what's happening in Kenya and what's happening in the United States. And in the United States, I think that too few of our leaders in government in particular recognize the inextricable link between security and development. And so right now, I know that we're under an extraordinary economic period and a lot of Americans are struggling, and we have a soaring deficit. But one of the things that is a natural target and that has become a huge target is the foreign aid and assistance budget. And there's a proposal right now on the table to slice it pretty errantly by almost 20%. And what frustrates me and frankly a lot of military generals as well who have come out against this is that especially in counterinsurgencies, foreign aid, foreign assistance, development, and diplomacy are connected directly to our national security and to our military efforts. And if we make those types of cuts, one of the proposals is to cut the U.S. Institute for Peace, for example. We're really doing a disservice to all of us, and especially our folks in uniform. So that's one of the things on the policy front that's immediate, that's here and now, and I think it's really reflective of our general, this general pressure in this world to have more and more short-term focus when what we really need is the long view. So in Kenya, I think that fundamentally that change has to happen from within. And it's our hope that the future leaders of that country, some of them will have come through our organization. And we're seeing that already. Salim, my co-founder, for example, never had a chance to go to college. And last year, he graduated with honors with a master's degree from the University of Manchester, with honors. And now he's the first ever representative for Ashoka in East Africa. And he's making an impact on that scale as well. So thanks for the question, Meg. That's a good question, and I should have expected that from a Dookie. Sir.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to ask you a question about kind of a concept in a model that's somewhat controversial, and that's microlending.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you whether or not you think that it's a model that is good or not good for sustainable growth and building infrastructure, and whether or not, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Access to finances and capital is a huge barrier for the poor in communities like Kibera, but then also in communities that are where most folks who live on under $1 a day live, which are rural areas. Our organization doesn't engage in microfinance in particular, but we work with some microcredit organizations that are run by Kenyans that we think have a particularly smart approach, and we can kind of connect with them. I think that there's reason to be concerned by some of those organizations, particularly the ones that I think if you look at sort of rates in particular and what the interest rates are that they're charging can be illustrative. I mean, I'm kind of skeptical actually when I hear like Citibank announcing its initiatives to roll out a microcredit organization, because I just don't see, even if it's well-intentioned, I don't see how that company, that entity, can break from the quarter-to-quarter demands of a shareholder-driven organization and really have the best interests of the communities that they serve at stake, as opposed to, wealthy folks in the Bay Area and Manhattan. Yeah, Kiva, phenomenal organization. I'm amazed by their growth. I was with their chairperson last night, Julie, and I'm very, very impressed by Kiva and the model that they use.
So my question is, I think a lot of people want to do things to help people in need, but there are so many people in need and so many different causes. And I read the news a lot, and if you just turn on the news or read CNN any day, there's just so many problems in the world. So I think sometimes people feel kind of paralyzed because where do you start? And how do you decide what cause? If you're going to take an hour a day, where do you put that hour?
Great question. I think from my experience, my big takeaway is that you really got to focus on the depth over the breadth and recognize that at the end of the day, all development is person to person. And it's a human connection. And so when you're thinking about the change that you can make in the communities that you're connected to, go deep, try and build those relationships, try and break down those boundaries and form friendships really that can endure. Because at the heart and soul, that's what we have as an organization. That's the core of it. And so that would be my thoughts on that. Thanks for the question.
Hey, Rye. Thanks for everything today and, abroad as well. My question has to do with the military. For a group that has a lot of power and quite a reputation, how do you see humanitarians like yourself sort of fitting in with rebuilding new territories across the world?
Yeah, so I think, and what I try and do with the book is really give an honest and from my opinion, accurate portrayal of both the strengths and the limits of the military. And I think a great limitation of the military is its engagement in development and capacity building type of work. And so, and what complicates this is that because it has so many resources. In Washington, they say it's like the 800-pound gorilla. Because it has so many resources at its disposal, it sometimes goes into these sort of forays into other lines of work. So I think that this is my personal opinion on it, is that we should have the smallest military possible for our national defense, and that any enormous bureaucratic organization has just tremendous amounts of waste and silly decisions that are made, and that our military certainly should not be exempt from looking at deep cuts within their own budget. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but that's part of my perspective on it. Yeah. In the book I write when in 2005. Our organization now runs on about $1 million a year, and for each person that's involved in it in Kenya, it's about $20 a year per person. About 6 years ago, we were at $140,000 a year, which was equivalent to the fully loaded cost of one military colonel, so a relatively senior officer deployed overseas for a year. So I think that just in terms of when you look at sort of resources and how they're allocated, there are enormous amounts of things that we can do with very small amounts of resources.
So, well, I just want to ask, we already said we want to keep the military as small, as efficient as possible. So, but as an area like Kenya, when there is will be no regime change without any military intervention. So when do you think, and under what circumstances do you think is correct for us to have some effective military intervention and also prevent us from doing nation building the next 10 years that we were doing in Iraq or Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, like the question of the day, right? As we look at Libya and what's going on there, I mean, how do we intervene when it gets to that point? And boy, you guys don't ask easy questions. I mean, my response would really be that you got to look at it from a case-to-case basis. That military force should only be used when it's absolutely necessary, because almost all of wars are far easier to start than they are to end, and we've learned that over the years. And so if I look at what's happening in Libya in particular, I think that you can sort of critique how soon we got into that engagement. Maybe we didn't move soon enough, but that I'm supportive of the actions that we're currently taking and not elevating it to putting boots on the ground and ground forces there, which can deeply complicate a situation. Yeah. Well, that was a good heavy question to end on. This has been so much fun. I know, and you know, I know that you all are right in the middle of a work day, so I tremendously appreciate your presence here. And if you could, please be involved with us and sign up on LinkedIn, and we will do a raffle within our organization. And you know, keep in touch. Let us know what you think. I'd love to hear your reactions and thoughts on how this connects to the issues that you care about and that you work with.
Thanks, Rye.
Thanks.
And for